We are here to talk about engaging families affected by domestic violence. Just one more chance to click on that link if you need your handouts. And the other thing I wanted to say is we had almost 400 people registered, and they were from 66 county agencies, as well as some folks from the State Division of Social Services. So we're really thrilled with the response, and we know this is such a topic of such interest to folks. So let's go ahead and get started. My name is Millicent Blythe, and I'm at the School of Social Work at UNC, and I'm going to introduce our phenomenal presenters in just a second. I'm just going to do a little bit of setting the stage for them. So the goals of this webinar are to help you in your jobs be able to identify and engage batterers, and also to really develop family service agreements that support behavior change. And as I mentioned, the presenters just have some great information and resources to help you really work with families to actually make observable changes in what's taking place to keep children safe. Because of course, that's the ultimate goal for everything that we do, is to help keep children and all family members safe, and in this case, particularly focusing on safety from domestic violence. So after a very brief orientation, I'm going to introduce our presenters, and they're going to cover a couple different areas. They're going to talk a little bit about what you need to understand domestic violence, some best practices for engaging families with domestic violence issues. They're going to talk about crafting those effective family service agreements and specific tools and suggestions. And then we're actually also going to spend a little time at the end talking about collaborating with community partners, because we know that's such a huge part of all the work that you do, but in particular in combating domestic violence and keeping families safe. So most of you have already found the primary way that you have to communicate with us today is through that chat box. So please continue to use that. It's really great to see your questions, your comments, examples, and as well as if you're having any kind of technical problem. We do also have these little icons. If you see up at the top of your screen, the picture of the little man raising his hand, and there are some different little icons you can put up. In fact, Claudia and Crystalle may even at different times ask you to use one of those. Just another way to get our attention and interact a little bit with you. So let me move on to our presenters, and many of you already probably know Claudia Kearney and Crystalle Williams. Claudia is a trainer with the North Carolina State University with the Center for Family and Community Engagement, and has a wealth of experience in domestic violence. You have more information on both of these women in your handout. So I'm just going to tell you the basics so you can actually hear from them. And so you can see Claudia's smiling face there. And we also have Crystalle Williams. You see Crystalle's smiling face as well. And Crystalle is a trainer with the North Carolina Division of Social Services, a trainer and program consultant. And Crystalle also has worked in the area of child welfare and domestic violence for a number of years, and so they bring just excellent experience, and we're really excited to have them and grateful that they took the time to develop this presentation and share it with everyone. We also have two folks on for technical support, Philip Armfield and John McMahon, and so again, they will be responding if you have any technical problems. Please go ahead and use that chat box, and you may get a little private chat from John or Philip. You'll see that down at the bottom of your chat box. You'll see it. There should be a little box that says everyone, and if John or Philip is trying to chat with you about a technical problem, you'll see another little tab with their name on it that will light up to let you know they're trying to communicate with you. So why this webinar? We know, as I said, from the huge response of almost 400 people registering, that this is a topic of great interest to DSS agencies across the state. And we certainly hear that anecdotally and actually in the case reviews that are done at the county level, and we also know at the state level in reviews and quality case reviews. It's a consistent issue that comes up as one of the barriers, particularly in in-home cases, but really in across the board in the cases that agencies are working with and struggling with. We also have some really interesting data from Project Broadcast, which hopefully, as you know, is the division's trauma-informed grant to create a trauma-informed child welfare system. And as part of Project Broadcast, the 9 pilot counties have been screening children for trauma exposure and symptoms. So far, they have screened over 1,100 children. And what they have found is that 42 to 43% of those children screened positive for exposure to domestic violence. So that's just kind of one snapshot, but I think it kind of quantifies what those of you working in the field already know from your practice, that this is a remarkably common experience for families, and that figuring out how to grapple with it is a really important part of keeping children safe and improving outcomes. So with that, I'm going to turn the mic over to Crystalle.
Good morning, everybody. Hope you all are doing well. I just want to start off by talking about our definition of domestic violence, kind of revisit that definition. The child welfare definition tends to be different from maybe some of the other systems with whom we work. So that's the next slide. This is our definition of domestic violence. This is the definition that you will find in our policy. And just so you'll know, the domestic violence policy is in our Family Services Manual. It is section 1409, and that's where you'll find the detailed requirements of child welfare workers when you're working domestic violence cases. And you will also find this definition. So when we talk about domestic violence, we're talking about the establishment of control and fear in an intimate relationship, and that establishment of control and fear is used through violence and other forms of abuse, and you see that list there. So a lot of what we do in child welfare, sometimes we focus on the physical abuse, and what we'll learn today and talk about is that the physical abuse is a very small part of what's going on with these families. And so we really need to understand all those other bullet points in order to properly assess risk. That definition has 3 basic components. That's the behavior, which I'm going to talk a little bit about in just a second, that it's a pattern and not an incident, and that the relationship, it has to be an intimate relationship, either current or prior intimate relationship. So when we're talking about domestic violence, these are the 3 components that we're talking about. Sometimes cases get screened in as domestic violence when they do not meet these 3 basic components. So for the purpose of this webinar, we will be talking about the behavior, a pattern, versus incident, and the relationship. So let's take a look at the power and control wheel. This is the end-all be-all when we talk about domestic violence. We often wonder, why do batterers do this and why do batterers do that? And if you look at the center of that wheel, you'll see the words power and control, and that is pretty much the reason why batterers do what they do. So the power and control is in the center. You have the inner spokes of the wheel, and you see all the different tactics that they use. So intimidation, emotional abuse, isolation, minimization, denying, and blaming. They also kind of twist the truth a little bit sometimes. They use children, and that includes using Child Protective Services against their victims. You know, if you keep this up, I'm going to call DSS on you, and we need to let them know that we're actually going to be partners with victims and not adversaries. They will use their privilege and also economic abuse as well. And if you notice, the smallest part of the wheel, well, actually, if somebody could type into chat, what is the smallest part of the wheel? Yeah, exactly. That physical, sexual violence. It's a very small part of what we're talking about. but it's necessary, or at least the threat of violence is necessary in order for batterers to hold this whole scene all together. So they will try the tactics, and then they will use the violence or the threats of violence in order to intimidate people to basically get their way. We have victims and survivors making life or death daily decisions for their children, basically because of this power and control dynamic. So we're going to talk about batterers just a little bit more. I often get questions, what is a batterer? How do I know? Do I need to send them for an evaluation? And you don't. This next slide talks about battering being a behavioral profile. And so if we want to know if someone's a batterer, all we have to do is look at their past behavior, look at that power and control wheel and see, are they doing things in that wheel? Do they have a history of doing things that are included in that wheel? So it's a behavioral profile. It's not a clinical decision. The judgment as to whether or not someone is a batterer is based on the information gathering that you do in child welfare. And I'll talk a lot more a little bit later about what that information can look like. So just want to give you guys an example. When I talk about a behavioral profile, if I walked into a bank and I held a gun to a teller and I demanded money and I walked out with that money, type in the chat, what would I be called? What would you call me? Exactly. I'm a bank robber. Do you need an evaluation to tell me that I'm a bank robber? No, we don't. Same way, we don't need evaluations, psychological evaluations to tell us someone's a batterer. Their behavior will tell us that. So that's kind of the good news. It's not as hard as I think what we sometimes feel it is. I know it's working with domestic violence, especially batterers, just can be so intimidating sometimes. We need a lot of systems to work with us. But this is something that DSS can do on our own when we actually assess who is a batterer. So the next thing I want to do is talk about dangerousness. That's the next slide. If you type that word into spell check or on your Word document, it will tell you that it's not a word, but it is a word, and there's actually a definition for it too. This information I'm getting ready to go over, this definition and the next couple slides, comes from Fernando Medeiros. He wrote an excellent document called Accountability in Connection with Abusive Men. And you all actually have the link to this document that I'm referring to. It'll be one of the last slides, the resource slide. So you'll actually be able to download this document for yourself. So this document came from Mr. Medeiros. So dangerousness is the demonstrated capacity to continue inflicting severe violence. It goes back to the behavior. It goes back to, what we already see that they're doing. And I'm going to give you guys some tips that help you understand how dangerousness can affect safety of children and their caretakers. So I'm going to go to the next slide. Okay. So when I talk about assessing dangerousness, it is the primary task of Child Protective Services and child welfare. People who batter, the level of dangerousness really depends. It varies. Some are very dangerous. They violate court orders. They really hurt people, put people in the hospital, lots of levels of violence. Some have lower levels of violence and yet still have that intimidation factor with their family that can also address safety. So the more that you understand how dangerous someone is, then the better you'll be able to assess risk. So the next few bullets kind of talk about how you can do that. Police arrest reports are very important. You would want to, whenever you work with a batterer, you want to make sure that you're getting their criminal history. The policy speaks to making sure that we do some primary assessment activities prior to going out on these cases, and one of those is checking for 911 calls to the home. So I would certainly, make sure that you include that in your assessment, and I would include, all recent addresses that they've had. Don't get stuck in this report, this victim, this family. Just kind of maybe ask if you know that they've lived in other places, trying to get those addresses as well. That'll help you give you a more complete view of how often the police are being called on them or how often they're being arrested. Criminal and mental health records, also very important. There's a lot of criminal elements of domestic violence that might not show up as a domestic violence charge per se. So you have trespassing, you have other type of crimes that happen within the context of domestic violence. So, taking a look at those can be very helpful. Whenever you have victims that actually that are able to go to the courthouse and sign affidavits and file a complaint, read those affidavits. And again, if you know of other relationships that this batterer has been into, it would not hurt you at all to be able to maybe see if there's other victim affidavits other than for the victim or survivor with whom you're working now. All of that gives you a complete picture. Previous reports, CPS reports, and I would even include screen-out reports. If you know that you've had screen-outs on the family, maybe someone called in and what the caller was alleging just did not rise to the level of abuse, neglect, or dependency, there still might be some good information there about maybe past assaults or past incidents of violence possibly. So I would encourage you guys to do that as part of your assessment. Also, information from all these people, probation, parole. If they are in a batterers intervention program, the facilitator of that program is very important in your case. They should be involved in your child and family team meetings. It's very helpful to know what folks are working on within the batterers program. So get to know your batterers program. Get to know, what that 26 weeks is all about. So when you're sitting down with somebody and you're doing a follow-up home visit, you can ask them directly, hey, I see you're in week 10. What are you learning? What did you learn last week? What are you all going to be learning next week? Can you talk to me about the homework that you have? When you have someone that's actually in a batterers intervention program, they have work to do, and you can certainly incorporate that into your services agreement, which I will actually talk about a little bit later. Children, family members, in-laws. When I say family, I'm talking about family on both sides, partners, and the abuser. All of those folks will give you some good information in order to assess dangerousness. When you talk to those collaterals, the ones that I had just spoke of, these are some things that you're going to be looking for. Does this person have use of and access to weapons? And I thought it was interesting, some of the literature talks about martial arts as well. Are they trained in that? Do they use martial arts as, a threat to violence? What is their history of violent crimes? Any type of violation, so a restraining order violation, a court order violation, maybe in a custody violation, any history of stalking. All those things are very important when you're looking at their overall history. When you're looking at alcohol and drug use, their history of motor vehicle violations or arrests involving alcohol can also speak to dangerousness and also lethality. If they're willing to get in the car and drive and have multiple arrests, then it lets you know that if they do use drugs or alcohol, that they may be more able to be violent as well. And then any past incidents, or I really don't like the word incidents, any past episodes of violence with partners or their children should be looked very closely at as well. If they have been to the batterers program, you've been there, done that, and they continue to be violent, that is a red flag. That is that batterer telling you that I am going to do what I am going to do at no cost, or at all costs, I guess. So that is something to pay attention to. And those, we have a pretty high rate of murder-suicides when it comes to domestic violence homicides, where the batterer will kill a family member, the victim, children, and or themselves. And so any history of suicide attempts, any type of ideations or threats, we really need to pay attention to those. So I want to pause right now for any questions that you all might have.
Thank you so much, Crystalle. Do you mind just muting your mic for me? That is great, thank you. And I do see a couple of questions that have come in, I think for you, Crystalle, but if we can also ask Claudia as well. So one from Dana, what if a probation officer will not give any information regarding the parent on probation?
I don't understand why they wouldn't want to do that. Is there a problem with confidentiality? What are their reasons for telling you that they don't want to give you the information? I see she's typing. I talked about that with your DSS attorney. I'm not sure that that is confidential. Crimes, when someone commits crimes, that's often public information, so I'm not quite sure. I'll have to maybe look into that one and get some more information about that for you. I need to look at him to interview him, and the case was also... Yeah, it seems like that should be information that you should be able to get. So let me think on that one a little bit and see if I can give you any resources, Dana.
And we can also, I'll just mention now and probably later throughout, we will do a follow-up document to this as we've done to past webinars. And so we can also, Crystalle, if it's helpful to talk with, the attorney generals or, whatever you need, we can send that out. And then another question that I think, Crystalle, probably for you is how do you access victim affidavits?
They should be a part of whenever you go to get, I'm losing my words, like the restraining orders. Whenever they go to make that complaint, the victim affidavit should be a part of that because it kind of talks about what happened. So it should be a part of that public record. Do you have any information on that, Claudia? Is that good? Okay.
And then another question is if physical or sexual abuse is not involved, but the batterer displays other behavior on that wheel, like threats, intimidation, isolation, or control, is it still considered domestic violence?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. And that's often what we see is, usually what we pay a lot of attention to is the physical, that physical piece. But really, the engine that's running the whole train is that power and control, those threats, intimidation, isolation, and all of that. So they can actively, that's more DV than anything else, I might say. So yes, and so your role in child welfare is to figure out how the threats, intimidation, isolation, and control is harming the children.
Great, thank you so much, and thank you for the questions. Please do keep them coming. But meanwhile, I am going to pass the mic to Claudia.
So whenever you start working with domestic violence and batterers, we wanted to talk a little bit about the best practices for engagement during this process. And whenever working with any population, but especially with batterers and domestic violence, you want to start with self-awareness. Examine how you feel about working with this population or about the population in itself. If you don't really know exactly how you feel, you can't form an educated way of approaching it. Our background, our values, our views, all that we've basically come with to the table doing this work we have feelings about it. And our feelings develop into biases if we're not examining them carefully. So another best practice is to be aware of your biases. What are they? If you know you do not understand this population, if you feel like these women who allow this to happen, they're just not smart women, or the batterers are being provoked, or whatever whatever you feel about this population, really own it. Examine it, own it, and then that way you can filter it. You may be going to your supervisor saying, I just don't think I can work with this population, or this. You may have a strong opinion about it and say, I can't work with batterers. I don't think they're good dads. I don't think they're good people. I don't think anything about this population, and I don't want to work with them. Whatever your feelings are, once you examine them, once you know exactly how you feel, and you don't have to put it, in the break room, this is how I feel. Absolutely. This is how I feel. You can just own it to yourself and work with it from there. I think that's one of the most important things to do, is to definitely examine your bias and filter, and then reflect on, okay, now that I know I feel this way, I went out and I worked with this family. How did that feel for me? How can I change the way that I operate, or did it work very well and I want to continue to do what I just did? Another best practice for engagement is understanding the culture of domestic violence. I think we approach different cultures in different ways, but one of the main things that we do, if it's a different culture as far as like English as a second language, or it's a religious culture or a military culture, we do our research. We find out we get interpreters, we go to the military communities, and we find a liaison to go on the bases. We really do our research when it comes down to a different culture. Domestic violence is a different culture also, and we shouldn't treat it as if it's the same thing. They have a culture of, part of domestic violence culture is it thrives in secrecy. So that's a main big part of DV. It can't grow. I often use the example of a candle. You can put a beautiful candle holder under a candle, and it will flicker, 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 flicker. You could put a candle holder beside it. You could put a candle holder like 4 all around it, and it still will just burn all throughout the night. If you put a jar or a candle holder on top of a candle, the fire immediately goes out. So with domestic violence, as long as you sandwich it around, like just kind of tiptoe around the secrecy, tiptoe around what's going on, it's going to continue to burn. It's going to continue to flicker and have a flame. But once you actually expose DV by actually putting that candle holder upside down on top of it, it has to go out. Batterers do not want you to know what's going on, because the power and control that Crystalle talked about earlier, it can't happen if everybody's involved. If people know what's going on, you can't have that type of control, because now you have people who are in your family, in your, I hate to say business, but in what's going on inside your home. Understanding that some of the manipulation tactics that batterers use, this is not something that batterers are like, oh, you know what, I'm going to sign up to be a batterer. Because it's a learned behavior, batterers use manipulation tactics with everybody, not just with their victims, not with with the survivors, but also with you. Understanding that in this culture of DV, when you're talking to a batterer, he's going to try to manipulate you as well, to make sure that, like Crystalle said, they may not tell you the truth all the time, because you are at a point now where I have to manipulate you. You have a little bit more power and control. But the batterer is thinking, you have a little bit more power and control happening here. I've got to figure out how to get my worker, or how to get the advocate, under my power and control will as well. recognizing that sometimes we come in as an agency or, advocates and say, you know what, we're going to treat this like a crisis intervention. And we all know when you have a crisis, you either, think it's flight, fright, or freeze. And you can't treat batterers like that. Batterers are not in a crisis. So they're not going to respond the way that the victim will respond or that some of your other families that you're working with will respond. You can't treat him like a father or a mother that's not in the home. You can't do that because that's not their story. That's not their culture. They are going to. It's not trauma to them. It's not crisis to them. This is the way they want to behave. I'm going to give you 2 examples, and I want you to type in chat which batterer do you think is the most dangerous. We have a batterer that has a pretty powerful job. Maybe a county commissioner, maybe he's a deacon in his church, or just pretty powerful. He's calling you. He is very on top of what he's supposed to do, and he's steadily telling you what the victim is doing. And then you have someone else who is absolutely just all over the place. Just he's irate every time you talk to him. He's very open about what's going on. He kind of works here and there, and he's very vocal about, I'm not stopping my behavior. Which batterer do you think is the most dangerous? I want you to type your answer in chat. Absolutely. I love that. Yes, and it is the first one because they have more to lose. And because domestic violence thrives in secrecy, they don't want to be exposed. So because they have more to lose and, they have more at risk at this point, you exposing him or her is like, oh my goodness, I'll lose my well-being, I'll lose my job. People will know that this is who I am. The batterer wants to be in control at home. So just keep it in mind when you start talking about domestic violence. You want to talk about family dynamics, and you want to make sure you're paying attention to the culture. Respecting the structure of the family. One of the things that we automatically do when we start looking at families, sometimes we say, you know what, oh, well, that's just the structure. The man is in charge. This is just this culture right here. Or the woman is provoking or whatever. But what you all probably should, what we would encourage you to do is definitely take a step back and say, is this the family structure or is this the culture of DV? Take the time to not just put everything in a box. If you've worked with a culture that it has a structure in place, DV culture should take side by side, parallel priority to whatever other culture you're looking at. Don't put all families in a box because DV is different all its own. Another best practice is to try to motivate the batterers or perpetrators to change. You can't make anyone do anything, but there's certain tactics that you can use to help motivate them for change. Fatherhood and motherhood has been proven to be a big motivator for change. When you think about how do you want your children to remember you? What is the legacy that you would leave for your kids? I worked with a batterers intervention program a while back, and I asked one of the fathers, I said, you're saying nothing is wrong with, what you're doing, and you don't know why you're in this class, and you just think everybody's against you, but your daughter is very important to you. He said, yes, she is. I said, well, let me ask you a question. Would you like for her to bring home someone exactly like you? Would you give your daughter's boyfriend or fiance the blessing to marry her if she brought home a clone of you? Although I didn't follow him past 3 years, I do know that that was a big motivator for him to change. He didn't see it that way. He felt like his daughter was separate and apart from his partner. He didn't see the comparison at all at first. And then once we brought it that way, so sometimes thinking about fatherhood, thinking about motherhood, thinking about this is not about how you parent or how he or she parents. You all will have to co-parent. And since you're going to co-parent, you can't always tell that other parent what to do. I think in the fatherhood training that the state offers, one of the things that they talk about is how parenting looks different. And when you're talking to the perpetrators, one of the motivations for change may be, you want say-so in parenting in your child's life. Your behavior, if it continues, will not allow for that because we have to keep the child safe. Would you like to be a part of your child's upbringing? Co-parenting is important. Is it important to you? That might be a motivation for change. Also, goals and dreams. Knowing where someone wants to end can help us know how to start working with the family. That batterer knowing exactly, he may not have a care in the world about being a father. So we wouldn't want to start with fatherhood or motherhood for him because that may not be what he cares about. Find out what the goals and dreams or what will motivate them to want to change. One of the ways you can help with that change is making sure they get appropriate services. I often tell people you don't want to offer stuff to people that doesn't help them. Abuser treatment programs that are certified by the Council for Women and DV Commission, Domestic Violence Commission, and that's the website right there that you can go and see which ones are actually certified by the Council for Women. Abuser treatment programs, so not anger management, it's not mental health, and it's not substance abuse services. They're just not appropriate for trying to help batterers change their behavior. But we've often found when you treat the mental health, you treat substance abuse, or you treat anger, but often they learn about triggers and what makes them angry and things like that. Well, if that's the case, well, she made me angry, so I'm allowed to batter again. Or he made me angry, so I'm allowed to batter again. Well, no, we don't want to teach them triggers. We want to teach them to be accountable for their behavior and not the victims causing it. Normally, anger management teaches what sets you off and how to handle what sets you off. So we don't want to send them to that. It re-educates and educates abusers about parenting, about their behaviors, how it affects their children, their effect on society, things like that. Because it is a learned behavior, letting them identify where this behavior came from. Because some batterers have not even identified, well, where did I learn this from? It's not hereditary. But my father did it and his grandfather did it. Now all of a sudden they're telling me it's not hereditary. I thought it was like an abuser gene or something. It helps them educate them to let them know that this is not, it's all about how they can change. It's something that they can change and how they became batterers and how they can stop. It focuses on victim safety. So again, it is not about them. It's about their behaviors and how to keep the victim safe and identifying changing belief systems. Because it is a learned behavior, and if you think about something that you have done for a long period of time, going to work and you drive the same way every day. That's just what you do. You get in the car and you drive to your job, same way every single day, and your job moves. Once they move, you get in the car, habit may take you, and you just go right to that same place. And maybe it's just me, but I do believe you can do that, and you just kind of drive to the same place. What's happened? You're going to have to actually identify and change that belief system. I don't believe I need to do this anymore. And why don't I need to do it anymore? I don't need to do it anymore because it hurts my children. It's not a good practice. They have to believe and want to change. So abusive treatment programs are excellent for that as well.
That was good. Thank you so much. And I know there's a couple of questions here. So let me first, I think maybe, Claudia, for you, the question is, what are the qualifications for the certified counsel programs that you mentioned? And can you say a little more about how they differ from anger management? Okay, Crystalle is going to take that. Sorry, Crystalle was talking, but I think there's just a little problem with her microphone. Sorry about that. So what she started to say was to look on page 8. But, you know, I'm going to hand her my microphone. Hold on one second.
Hello. If you guys will look on page 8, handout 8, you'll see a handout that is titled Batterer Intervention Program or Anger Management. And so that will actually address the question that we had regarding the difference. I'll give you guys a kind of a second to look over that. While you're looking over that, I want to kind of address a language. We've used different terms. So you've heard me refer to Batterer Intervention Program. That's what's on the top of this document. And then in the previous slide, we talked about abuser treatment programs. So they are the same thing. In North Carolina, legally or by statute, they're referred to as abuser treatment programs. I do know that there is a push to get that name changed because it's not treatment. You know, just as Claudia just talked about, you know, these aren't people who are, you know, it's not treatment. It's a re-education program. And so I'm not sure where we are with the legislature with trying to get that changed, but you might hear abusive treatment program and batterer intervention program used simultaneously. So if you look at the handout, if someone could type in the chat, what are the differences between BIPs and anger management?
Just waiting. So some folks are typing. So Crystalle was asking, okay, the differences from page 8, if you've gotten there, the differences between abuser, batterer intervention programs and anger management programs.
Yes, Hannah, victim safety is one of the #1 pieces, and that's what Claudia just talked about. The facilitators of those groups, they keep in close contact with victims to find out, you know, if there's reassaults, and, you know, if there is a reassault while someone is in a program, the facilitator of the program will probably be one of the first people that the victim tries to contact about that. So they are very centered into victim safety. It's a big part of what we do. Good.
Okay, thank you, Crystalle. Another question that's been pending for a little while, and I think, again, Crystalle, this might be you. In a past DSS training last year, the trainer stated that for it to be classified as DV, you actually needed all 5 criteria: power, control, isolation, physical abuse, etc. Can you speak to that and maybe clarify that a little?
I hope I'm not the one that told you that. No, I mean, I think oftentimes at DSS it comes to us for physical reasons. Like, usually we don't get a report because, you know, a child got called a name or because their parent got called a name. Usually we get a report because something physical happened. But no, you can certainly, so it might be the reason for screening in, but certainly the other pieces, the other tactics that are used, that underlying power control is a big piece of it. So no, I would, if I did say that, I'm taking that back. I did not mean to say that, but no, they all can be power control, because you can be a batterer and never lay a hand on anybody in your family. I can be a batterer and I can abuse our family pet, and that's how I control people in the household. I can be a batterer and I can create an environment of fear where I'll put holes in the wall and I'll say things to you like, I hit the wall, not you, those types of things. It's still creating an environment of fear. It still feeds into the intimidation and the control. So thank you for that question.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think other folks have been responding to Crystalle to the issue, that about the difference from anger management, whereas anger management is about any situation. This is really focused on that control of the victim. So great, folks are right on that. Okay, a couple other questions I want to feed to you guys. How do you work with abusers who are court-ordered or not and go through the abuser treatment or intervention 2 times and are unsuccessful, but the victim continues to go back? We look at safety for the children and keep them out of the home.
Okay, I'm reading your question again. I mean, we're in the business of child safety, so oftentimes in situations like this where you've tried to do reasonable efforts to provide the right services to the victim and the batterer, and they're still being violent, the safety of the children is an issue. And so, yeah, I mean, that we would look at that child either not being in that home or being with a kinship placement. Something like that. But sometimes whenever we have victims that just aren't there yet, then we do have to step in and make sure that we keep kids safe. The key to that, though, is to make sure that we have done our reasonable efforts, that we've made sure that we've really not blamed the victim, not told them what to do, but asked them what works for them. And when we do that, when we offer them supports and services and they say thank you but no thank you, then oftentimes we have to take that to court.
And go ahead, Chris. Go ahead, Claudia.
And like Crystalle said, making sure that we're actually doing the reasonable efforts and making sure that you are looking at it from a keep the child safe. The child safety is truly what's in harm's way. That we're not using our own measuring stick of what a family should look like. If the victim continues to go back, is it really a safety concern? Or is this just the way their family has decided to operate? I think the policy and practice training that Crystalle does speak a lot to that, but just making sure we're not saying, well, this shouldn't happen, and period, so this is how we feel. Making sure that this is definitely a policy measuring stick, not our own.
Okay, thank you. And another question that I think might be a common one, which is saying that in our county, parents are consistently court-ordered to participate in mental health and anger management instead of abuser treatment or certified programs. So what advice would you give in that situation?
I'm so glad you asked that. Actually, the handout that on page 8 that was developed, it was developed by B. Cote, who does batterers intervention in several counties around the Mecklenburg County area. The reason that she made this document was to give to those people that you're talking about, to our partners, to the court, to judges, to attorneys, to probation officers, to lots of people so they can actually see what the difference is. Because I think a lot of people just don't understand that there's any difference. But once they realize that this isn't about anger, this is not about anger. They're angry at a lot of people, and they don't assault them and berate them and intimidate them and have power and control over them. This is about hurting the people who are closest to you. And I think that the more they understand that, the better. So I think this document is a start. If you need further assistance with that, maybe we can talk about that a little bit later.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I know a few other questions have come in, and don't worry, if we don't get to all of we are capturing them. we will also be doing that follow-up Q&A document. And again, you have some of those excellent resources, including ones to share to advocate in your county. So for right now, I want to make sure we have time to talk about effective family service agreements, so I'm going to pass it back to Crystalle.
Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about service agreements, and what I really want to go over is the elements of it. I'm not going to really do exact service agreements, but just want for you all to think about what goes into a service agreement. You'll see that very first bullet talks about that it needs to be behaviorally specific, family-driven, and not cookie-cutter. And I bet that when I start this next phrase, somebody's going to type into chat and finish it for me. So here we go. Let's try this out. The parents will not engage in domestic violence in the presence of who? The children, right. That is something that we see very often on service agreements and safety assessments. So-and-so will not engage in domestic violence in the presence of the children. And what we know is that is a very cookie-cutter approach to it. It sends lots of different, that statement sends lots of different messages. One of which that it's okay as long as it's not in front of the kids. Another is that the victim is equally at fault. And even if that's not what we mean, that's what the family gets from it. So with service agreements, we have to be behaviorally specific. So we'll kind of talk about how to look at that behavior of concern so that we can really center our service agreement around that. The second piece of service agreements, is including both formal services and also informal services. And with any service that we put in place, we need to make sure that they're really going to do the service. So like with victims, I know a lot of times we'll run in and we'll say, you need to do this and go to this class at this building. This is what you need to do. You need to take parenting. It's a very common thing that we say. And a lot of times people will agree with us and they'll say, okay, I'll do that. You're DSS and I don't want to lose my children, and so I'll do that. When really in the back of their mind they're thinking, I'm not going to do that. I don't want to do that. I either don't have the capacity, the willingness, or sometimes we overlook this. Maybe I could go. I have a car to go to that class. I guess I'm willing to go, but I have absolutely no confidence that that parenting class is going to help me. Therefore, I'm not going to go. So sometimes whenever they aren't doing what we want them to do or think they should do, even when they've agreed to it, we might want to check these three factors to see whether or not we can get a more realistic plan in place. The third bullet talks about that the safety plan is part of the larger service plan, and I will actually show you what I mean in the next couple slides with that. I have an example of that for you. All right, so let's look at this. So when we look at family service agreements, there are three components of it. One is the behavior of concern, and oftentimes what I'll see on service agreements in that section, I'll see domestic violence. That's not what we're looking for. When you're outlining the behaviors of concern, we want to know what happened. What behavior caused this child to be maltreated? What is the major concern? Then once we correctly identify that behavior of concern, it makes it a little bit clearer as the behavior that we want to see, which is often the opposite. And so that's what the objective is. The objective should be stated as, the behavior that we want to see. What will it look like when we can close this case? What will it look like when we feel like the children are safe? That's what the objective statement should be. And then activities are simply how to get there. So those are your services, those are your tasks. Sometimes one of the mistakes that I see us make in child welfare is we will list an activity as an objective. For instance, the objective is that they will go to the batterers program. Okay, they go. And at the end, if they haven't changed their behavior, we're not done with them. but yet they're looking at us like, aren't you done with me? I did what you told me to do. So the objective should actually be that they will stop their behavior, that they will be nonviolent, and going to the batterers intervention program is one way that they can get there. So that would be an activity. So let's look at some of behaviors of concern. So these are just examples. Would encourage you just to kind of think about overall what the problem is with the person that you're dealing with. We certainly don't want these to become cookie cutter either. But just what happened? You know, this person has a pattern of violence, control, and intimidation. You want to make sure that you're, you know, if you just kind of say that, you want to make sure that your documentation is very detailed as to what those behaviors are, and you want to make sure that, you know, if you're sitting around in a CFT coming up with this plan, you want to make sure that the batterer knows exactly what you're talking about, the behaviors that you guys have assessed and observed, maybe even. You know, have they been undermining the other parent's parenting? Have they turned the children against the other parent, the protective parent? That is very common in domestic violence cases. You know, sometimes they don't fully understand how the kids have been affected. Like, they don't get it. I don't see what the problem is. They don't understand what the children have experienced and what the consequences are of the children experiencing and witnessing abuse. For the victim, possible behaviors of concern could be that there's no safety plan yet. You know, they don't have a safety plan set up. Also, maybe they don't understand how to use the legal or court system. They don't get it at all. They don't understand what a restraining order is. They know that somebody down the street got one once, but they don't really know a lot about them or what they can do or what they can't do. And oftentimes, survivors and protective parents have not talked to the children about the abuse. Haven't really talked to them about it to see how the kids feel, and that's a behavior of a concern as well, and that's something that we can work with them on during the course of the in-home case. So when you think about a services agreement, these are some elements of a services agreement. There's 3 sides of this. So I think we got a total of 14. And again, you guys have this handout, so you'll be able to go back and refer. But certainly, one of the first things that you want to make sure you include is that they are halting and stopping their abusive behaviors. It can say, you know, this person will be nonviolent to all family members. That they, you know, agree to stop. I guess you could say they could stop. Of course, I don't really like that because I like it to be in the positive. So really learning how to be nonviolent is really the goal. That's what we want them to be able to do. So you want to have something in your services agreement that says that. Claudia talked earlier about secrecy and how it thrives in secrecy, and about how batterers like that. It helps them kind of get away with stuff. So making sure that confidentiality waivers are signed should be a piece of your services agreement as well. It is vital in order for us to measure compliance or change. I like the word change better than compliance. In order for us to measure that, we need to be talking to everybody involved. So that could be, again, probation, parole, the mental health, if they are going to mental health, the BIP program or the user treatment program. We want to make sure that we have those confidentiality waivers in place so that we can talk to folks. Batterers don't like it when we're all talking. And if there's a court hearing, we at Child Welfare need to be there. Court is a place where batterers can often exert their power and control. They often present very well in court. And so it's important for us to know what they're saying to judges and what judges are saying back to them. And it's important for courts to know that DSS is involved. We're involved. There's a concern for child safety, and we want you to know that we're involved. So I just kind of added that in with the waivers just because it made me think They hate when we all talk to each other. So getting waivers and being there in court, talking to the people they don't want us talking to, that's going to be a huge part of your services agreement. We have talked about attending the program, so I think we can go past that one. So what if you don't have a batterers intervention program? What if they can't go for whatever reason? So individual therapy and counseling is an option. It's not the best option. The first option is if there is a BIP that they go to that group. That unless for some reason they can't participate in a group, either for mental health reasons or maybe substance abuse reasons, they can't operate within a group setting. So for those, so when that's not an option, individual therapy or counseling can be done, and you have to make sure that the person who is doing the therapy and counseling knows about domestic violence. The focus has to be on change in behavior, not their partner's behavior. This is not marriage counseling. Domestic violence is not a marital or a relationship issue. I'm going to say that again. It is not a relationship issue. It's not about people fighting. It is about power and control. It's a power and control issue. So we have to make sure that the people who are working with this population understand that and are going to be willing to hold them accountable during sessions. Also, again, if they're in therapy, you want to make sure that you have those confidentiality waivers so they can report to you guys if there has been a threat issued during therapy. For those batterers who do have substance issues, attending a substance abuse treatment should be part of what they're doing. It does not take the place of domestic violence. It is a separate program. Okay, if you have, sometimes I'll see service agreements where domestic violence is clearly the issue, but the only service on the services agreement is substance abuse services. That's great. That'll help with the substance abuse piece. That will not help them learn not to be violent with their partners and to take accountability for that. They should participate in parenting education. I have several handouts, well, not several, but there are some handouts in your handout packet that will help you with this, things that you can take to them and maybe do one-on-one with them when you're meeting with them every week or twice a month or however often you need to be seeing them. But something about parenting education is going to be very helpful. Letting them know how the children have been affected by this, how their power, control, and their behavior has affected their ability to parent, and also their partner's ability to parent. Those factors should be included in your services agreement if you see that that's an issue. Some batterers have psychological issues. Some of them do have mental health issues and maybe even diagnosis. So sometimes psychological testing is appropriate. You just wouldn't need that testing to tell you all that they're a batterer. Because again, their behavior is telling you that they're a batterer. Another element, if you have somebody that's not together, or a couple that's not together anymore, for them to be able to demonstrate the ability to cooperate in joint custody agreements. So, maybe you need to be really specific about what an exchange of the children looks like. What is allowed, what isn't allowed, who needs to be there. Is there a safe person who the batterer respects that you're going to bring into that? Those types of things can be talked about during your CFT. When the batterer, because we have to have separate CFTs. So when you have that batterer support system around the room, it's a great time to talk about this. Who is going to step up and be willing to be a non-violent, person in their life. Help encourage nonviolence. Number 9, learning about the effects of witnessing violence on kids, taking steps to heal the damage that's been done. Very important. I know people who've had me in training before have heard this analogy that I actually got from B. Cote, who I referred to earlier, about the difference between responsibility and accountability. And so responsibility sounds like this. I spilt the milk. My fault. Didn't mean to do that. Try not to do it again. But I spilt the milk. Whereas accountability is, I spilt the milk, therefore I need to clean up the milk, and I need to replace the milk. So when I'm talking about accountability of batterers, I'm talking about them recognizing what they've done, being willing to heal the damage that they've done to their children and their partners, specifically their children. And I want them to be able to replace those violent behaviors with healthy, nonviolent behaviors. So when I'm talking about accountability, that's what we're talking about. So anytime that they can learn about what this is doing to their kids, there's so much stuff, there's so many resources out there about how that affects kids that you could share with them during your visits and can be a part of your services agreement. Random alcohol and drug screening can be helpful, especially for those batterers that say, I only do this when I'm drunk, or I'm only like this when I'm using drugs. That might be true. They might only be very, very violent when they're drunk or when they're using drugs. But what about the non-physical, non-criminal elements that we've talked about? Are they still stalking? Are they still, clocking the miles on the car? Are they still, question the children to death about, what's going on? Are they taking the phone away so that, so that I can't call anybody during the day? Those are things that often batterers do when they're not drinking. Drug abuse and substance abuse does not cause domestic violence, and that it does severely overlap. So although we can't demand drug screens of folks, that can be something that certainly that you might want to throw out there on the table during your CFT. Hey, Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so, you say you only do this when you're drinking, or when you're using drugs, so how about we set up some drug screening, trying to help you hold you accountable for that. We got 11 is permission to obtain all those records that we've already talked about. Supervised visitation might be something. Of course, you'll need to figure out who would be the proper person to supervise that visitation. I do have a question. I want to pause for a second. Do any of you all, maybe type in chat, do y'all have supervised visitation programs in your counties? Which counties? Nice. Mecklenburg, Forsyth, Union. Yeah, not since funding was pulled, really. Okay. Utilize those folks. There's actually another document that I have that maybe we'll include in the follow-up document that speaks specifically for supervised visitation around domestic violence needs. And so I will locate that and we'll include that in the follow-up document. That might be helpful for you guys to share with your partners. Also, you want to make sure that they're complying with all the court orders, and that includes child support order as well. If a batterer has left the home, that does not negate their responsibility to care for their child and support their child. So oftentimes courts can incorporate those responsibilities into a court order. And the last thing I kind of spoke to earlier, you really want to help them think about who in their life is nonviolent. Who could support them in being nonviolent? Is it their own family? Is it a faith leader? Is it just somebody who they really, really, really respect? Having those conversations might be able to help you come up with a good network. So those are some of the elements. Let's flip quickly. These are just some examples of an actual activity or objective for a protective parent. So before we had said, hey, so-and-so doesn't have a safety plan yet. That's the behavior of concern. The objective, let's get one together. Word that however you want. Activities, maybe somebody can get online and search safety plans and see which one I'm going to use. Maybe then I'll choose that safety plan. I'll review it with my social worker. I'll practice it with my children. I'll let you know if I'm able to do something in it. So that's an example of what an objective and activity could look like for that behavior of concern for the protective parent. And then here's a second one. I talked about, they don't know about legal and court interventions. So the objective would be that victims know about legal and court interventions and be able to use those systems to advocate. And then you see all of those activities there that they could possibly do as part of that services agreement. Quickly, the Women's Law website, that is a great resource to learn about restraining orders. And so what I was saying is, maybe they could go online, they could learn about it, they could develop a list of pros and cons, and then get back with you to see if that's something that would be useful to them. They don't have to get restraining orders. It is certainly an option, but they don't have to do that. And that brings us to the end of service agreements for now.
Thank you. I'm going to just try to get through some of these questions quickly. So one quick one, I think, is Alexander County was asking, are materials available in Spanish? I know you've got a slide with some resources. Do you know of particular ones for Spanish-speaking families?
If you wouldn't have asked me, I wouldn't know. I do not know if this document, the Accountability in Connection with the Abuse of Men, is available in Spanish, but let me do some research to see which ones are.
Great, thank you. Yeah, the power and control are, Claudia says. Okay, so we can put some information on that in the follow-up document. There was a question, can there be domestic violence if the perpetrator does not live in the home and they have never lived together but are dating and having a child together? And I'm going to quickly say that, yes, it can be because of that definition that it's an intimate relationship wherever people live. And some examples of sort of trying to clarify the definition. If batterers physically abuse their victim but do not try to control or intimidate them, is it still DV?
Yes, we would say absolutely, because oftentimes that physical abuse is the intimidation and the way to get that control. Yeah, that's a great question.
Some other examples, like throwing a drink in one's face, I mean, absolutely would be an example of intimidation. Go ahead, Claudia. Sorry.
I think the main thing to remember about domestic violence, and when you're trying to define it, is, is that victim afraid of something? Whether it's afraid of being hit or whether it's afraid of you're going to go to the rest home and do something to my father or mother, you're going to kill the pet. Is there some type of fear of something? And I think, not to box it all the way in. We do have a wonderful definition and a control wheel to help us, but also, is there a fear of any type of consequence if he or she is battering at that moment?
Then there was also some interesting conversation about one of your bullets. Crystalle talked about one of the concerns might be that a parent has not spoken with the child or children about the domestic violence, and there was some chatting about what I think is really sort of the different ways of talking about the abuse. I mean, a parent relying on a child as their confidant and to make themselves feel better. For example, one of the counties said, at a family visit, or the child comes home and the parent is telling the child, because I'm upset and I need comfort as a parent. That's not what you're talking about. You're talking about, have I as a parent spoken with my child to support them about what's going on, acknowledging the reality and working together to keep them safe? Would you add anything to that?
No, that's exactly what I'm talking about. And maybe even another document for the follow-up. It just occurred to me. For the follow-up document, in the domestic violence training, we have a few handouts that you could take to help facilitate that conversation with the victim, to make them think about, what do I want to say to my kids? And it gives you some ideas about what they should say and what they should not say. So I'll make sure I include that in the follow-up document as well.
Yes, because there was some conversation about it, because not talking to them can be as harmful as talking to them. So how they talk to them, it's not necessarily should they talk to them or not, it's how they should talk to them, because the children are aware, even if they're not at home, they're aware of the dynamics. You kind of know, if you walk into your home, you kind of know when someone's been there or something. Kids are just as observant. There's something going on. So it's not, what or when or if, it's definitely how.
Great, thank you all. One other question I just want to mention. So, sorry. So, asking about evidence of impact on the children by the domestic violence. I mean, I know there's a lot out there. Is there a particular? I'm thinking the National Child Traumatic Stress Network certainly has a lot of evidence. I'm looking at our presenters to see. We can certainly include in the follow-up document if there's other particular sites. And again, I think in general, if you look in your handouts, I just want to quickly page through those. You'll see that Crystalle and Claudia have given some great resources, and they have the citations where they came from, most of them, and you'll also have a slide. So a lot of those sites that they're referring you to also have, you know, could provide some of the sort of citation and research about the damage if you're looking to sort of advocate or educate, whether it's educating parents or advocating with the court system. But we'll also see if there's anything else they want to add in the follow-up document. Okay, we have a little bit more on community collaboration. So Claudia, I'm going to turn that to you while we scan for more questions.
Okay, so like we talked about earlier, you definitely want to involve your community partners. One, I think it can definitely make your life a lot easier, and it's helpful to the both the victim and the batterer, because the community has things that we really don't always have at our fingertips. So one of the reasons that you should involve community collaboration is vital to the reduction of domestic violence and child maltreatment. Crystalle and I both spoke to the fact that it thrives in secrecy, and if you have everybody in the community all on board that's involved with this family, then yes, you know, it holds people accountable in every area of their life, which is very important. It's a major component of the multiple response system. In the MRS strategies, I think collaboration is mentioned in the strategies at least 5 out of the 7 times, which is very important when you start talking about multiple systems responding in the same exact way of holding batterers accountable. And then it gives the responsibility to everyone in the community. It's just not your responsibility. It's not just the domestic violence agency responsibility. It's not just the batterers. It's not just the victims. It actually becomes a community of people. And when you start thinking about domestic violence and repairing and things like that, this is a great time to have a child and family team meeting. All those people can come to the table. How you can have it, some people have them separate, some people have them together, but just having everyone there. Crystalle talked about the spilt milk. I often think about when I'm trying to help community partners and batterers be accountable. I often tell them, if you think about a wooden fence around your home or around anyone's home, you have that fence, and it's like, okay, it's great. If I go through and I say, you know what, I'm going to put a nail in every single piece of this fence. You come outside and you're like, oh my goodness, who put these nails in my fence? I want my nails out the fence. If I go through and pull out every single nail that I just put inside the fence, is your fence back to where it's supposed to be? No. It still has little holes all over the fence. So now you have to, it's a whole collaboration of how to get that fence back. One, you have to have something to pull the nails out of the fence. You have to have some wood and plaster to go back inside to fill the holes. And then you have to have somebody come back through, sand it down, and now you have to repaint the fence. I just can't repair that fence on my own. And pulling out the nails just doesn't work because I still have holes there. And it's a process, and it's going to take time. So I do believe community collaboration is important just for that whole repair of the family. We have some community partners listed. It's law enforcement, substance abuse, schools, juvenile justice, DSS, medical providers, abuser treatment programs, victim services, probation, we talked about them some, courts, mental health, things like that. All these people can surround the family. And I love the fact that you're not just surrounding them, but you're also supporting them. Did I miss anybody on that previous slide? I'll go back. Did I miss anybody? And if so, you could type in chat who you've had at the table and how some of your community partners can hold batterers accountable. How have they done that? Have you seen it?
Just while folks are typing that, both about the if there are other community partners that are key in your community, or what are some of the things that your community does do to hold batterers accountable? Are there some other things that your courts or your law enforcement have included in the requirements for batterers? But while folks are answering those questions, I just want to note that Crystalle answered in the text the question about if you have a boyfriend who does not live in the home and is not a parent of the children. And so, as she said, that limits DSS's ability to hold the batterer accountable if the person is not actually a caretaker by the legal definition. So in those cases, it really is your community partners that need to do that, and it does put more responsibility on the non-offending parent. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm just trying to scroll down to see. So I see we are getting close to time. I'm going to try to, we'll try to answer as many questions as we can, but I'm imagining we may not get to all of them, so we will, again, capture those for that follow-up document. I do want to just mention, though, in your handouts, another resource that you have on page 7, thank you, Crystalle, is some other ideas of examples of ways that the court system in particular can hold batterers accountable. So you'll see, there's just an array of things in here that hopefully will be helpful not only for you and your work, but for your agency attorney, your supervisors, your leadership, to advocate with your court partners to make sure that as a community you really are holding batterers accountable and providing the services that are evidence-based to make the most difference. So with that said, let me just, I think we're going to move on to the closing. I want to mention that Crystalle has put in, and Claudia, these are a combination of some additional really helpful resources and websites. Again, you have this in your handouts. Your slides start on page 11 of your handouts. And the pages that we have not quite referenced, pages 9 and 10, when Claudia and Crystalle talk to you about speaking with batterers, there's some great resources about actual, things to say, suggestions to help buy into that, what Claudia talked about, that motivation for those who are parents to understand the effect that the battering has on their children. We do have a few more minutes, so I'm just going to try to get to a few more questions. I'm sorry, someone had also asked if you can speak a little bit about the issue of mutual violence when there's not one clear victim and both parents seem to have a power struggle, and how that might change your approach.
Yeah, sometimes we don't know. I mean, the report comes in, it's unclear. We go out there and do the assessment. It's just not clear. So sometimes that happens. I can tell you that you cannot have two batterers in one relationship. That is not something that you will see. So in the situations that you're talking about, all that we can do is focus on each parent's behavior and make each parent responsible for making sure the children are safe. Because sometimes it goes to in-home, and we still aren't really clear about who's the victim, who's the batterer. If there's not that power and control, no one's scared of anybody else, and you just kind of have these, and you're having these incidents of violence, that certainly can also be a child welfare issue, even though it's not, quote unquote domestic violence with the power and control and all that. Children can be hurt in the mutual ones too. So how does it change your approach? I don't think it really does. I think that just like with domestic violence cases, you're going to focus on each parent's behavior and make each parent accountable for their own behavior.
And then another interesting question is, in those cases, again, we've had a few where the boyfriend is not a caretaker, but the mother is continuing to expose the children or to the violence. You sort of walk that line between not wanting to blame, wanting to hold the the victim parent accountable for protecting her children, but not blaming her or making, as the victim. So any suggestions in those situations?
I think that we just need to make sure that we are doing reasonable efforts to provide services and supports. We provide opportunities to safety plan. Anytime you work with a domestic violence victim, you should have a safety plan on file, kind of about like what that looks like. So I think that that's a really important piece of it. And then I lost the question. Where did it go? I think that might have been all I wanted to say about that. There it is. Yeah, so how do we approach it without causing the victim to be blamed? Again, you're going to do what you can, offer them what you can, safety plan, take their ideas, and the whole time you're doing that, you're doing concurrent planning, and you're looking at, so if these children cannot be with you, where would you want them to be? You're still having those conversations. Absolutely.
And like Crystalle said earlier, focusing on the act, not necessarily what the mother is or is not doing, but this is what is happening, and this is what your children are being exposed to. So it's a thin line, and you have to approach it carefully, but just making sure that you're approaching it from this is what's happening. This is not, necessarily used as the behaviors.
Okay, thank you. I'm just scanning through the questions. I think, Crystalle, you were going to mention someone had asked about the video documenting the abuse.
Yes, I'm glad you asked about that. So the slide 39 with actually it's the one that's up. The survivortosurvivor.net, that website, that is where you would find the documenting the abuse video. That is a fantastic North Carolina-based website that's got lots of different resources and video clips. I think there's one that even says, am I abused? And so it's like a 15-minute clip of real people, real advocates talking about their experiences. So there's several different videos. Documenting the abuse is just one of them, but I would highly suggest that you guys look at those and try to figure out how can I incorporate that into either a safety assessment and or a services agreement.
Yes, and so I also got a question about anything that you would add about if it's a situation where it's a woman battering a woman or a man battering a man. So same-sex relationships, any different?
No, not a whole lot of differences. One thing I will say is that, I'm probably guilty of it, saying he, as far as the batterer is concerned, and it's only because national statistics say that batterers are more batterers than they are men than they are women, but there's some differences in like outing if people don't already know. Sometimes the batterer can use that as a tactic to control, and sometimes there are services that you won't put into place, or they may not feel comfortable going. Maybe there's a church or some type of place that maybe doesn't agree with the LGBT community, and some resources may not be as plentiful, but I'm finding that they are, and just making sure that, again, making sure you don't send batterers to anger management. You wouldn't send a batterer to any type of program that's not helpful for them. So yes, there's plenty of women battering women, there's plenty of men battering men, and women battering men. So sometimes the dynamic is different because there's men aren't always taken as seriously when they're saying, oh, my wife is battering me or abusing me or something like that. So
thank you so much. I know there were some questions we have not gotten to. Again, do look for that follow-up document. We will send that out to everyone who registered for the course, and you will also get a link to the recording of this webinar. And if you have folks at your agency who have, obviously you can share those resources with them, but also on the FCRP website and on NCSW Learn website, you can access the video recordings and the follow-up documents as well. So those are also available online. You also have Crystalle and Claudia's contact information, and they have graciously agreed to be available directly if you have other questions or needs. I thank you so much to both of you for an excellent presentation, and thank you to the participants for the excellent questions.